Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Microsoft Fabric UK user group. I'm your host, Leon Gordon, and I'm here alongside my co host, Pragati Jain. Hi, Pragati.
Hey, Leon. Great to be here.
How are you doing today?
Oh, good. Logged off early, so yeah, pretty good.
That always helps. And a little birdie tells me that you and our guest speaker are both flying to Croatia tomorrow.
Oh yes, we are going to for Data Saturday Croatia for this Saturday. So yeah, going to be in Croatia
Oh,
soon.
fantastic. Well, enjoy, and it's probably warm over there as well, which leads me to ask, obviously, our introductory question that we always ask is we want to know where everybody in the world is joining us from. So please jump into those comments and let us know. It's a very different evening for me this evening. I'm actually at the Microsoft Reactor building in London. There's going to be a Fabric Q&A this evening, which I'll be taking part of directly after this show. So we will, or at least I will leave on time this evening, depending on how we get on. And if you are in the London area, then nip down after this session. So I was very fortunate to pick this up because Pragati can't make it due to traveling to Croatia tomorrow. So,
No, I think definitely, guys, if anyone is in London, then definitely go to Microsoft Reactor because it's going to be a very interesting Q&A on Microsoft Fabric.
yes, but don't leave until after this session. So, with that being said, let's give our introduction. So, today's session, which started off as a mystery session before the Microsoft Build plethora of announcements. So, today's session title has been revealed, and it is Microsoft Fabric, a Data Revolution with Mathias Petersen. So, Matthias is a self proclaimed data fanatic, obsessed with helping organizational leaders make better decisions through expanding and utilizing their data ecosystem. So, Matthias is also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and he offers unique perspectives to analytics, which often dabble in other products, data prototypes, and the importance of user research. So, Matthias has over several years of experience working with data in high tech, high growth, having taught him a thing or two about working with and designing data platforms. So, without any further ado, let me introduce Matthias. Matthias, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking very much forward to this.
It's
Yeah.
an absolute pleasure. And we were just saying behind the scenes that this has to be the most rescheduled webinar that we've ever put together. So,
Yeah.
for those of you that don't know, we've been trying to get a date working with Matthias for at least the last 6 months. So making this happen has been amazing. So I know we're up against it with time today, Matthias. So we're going to hand directly over to you to jump into your session. Best of luck and thank you for making the time to join us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And yeah, it's been rescheduled for a few times, but if that means we get a chance to talk about Fabric, I'm all happy. So not everything happens only for bad reason.
I think what
Totally.
matters is you're here, right? So yeah,
I'm here and we're good, and we have such an exciting
topic today.
new tool to investigate. Yeah.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Perfect. We'll hand over to you, Matthias. As always with the audience, if you do feel that you need anything from an accessibility perspective, microphones up or down, screens being zoomed in, etc., then please do let us know in the comments. Matthias, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Liam. And as I said, thank you so much for having me. Um, there you go. There's my screen and everything. So yeah, been looking forward to this session on Microsoft Fabric, which only released a week ago from now. So first ever live streamed session on Microsoft Fabric to the community on my behalf. I assume also for the user group here, and probably for a lot of viewers out there, it's the first time looking into this. So I'm curious in the chat. I probably won't be able to monitor it, but I'm curious on what is the distribution here. How many of you already heard about Fabric? How many of you already know some things? And how many of you have actually played with the tool so far? Have you had your hands on it, worked with it, or is it very much very new for you? Would be interesting for me to hear. So if you ask me, Microsoft Fabric is a game changer. I think the closest comparison I've thought of was what happened in the space of front-end BI data modeling and reporting around 5 or 6 years ago when Microsoft introduced Power BI. So what happened with Power BI is we got the true democratization of BI. And what I anticipate Microsoft Fabric will result in is a similar movement, but for the back end of our BI and data. So I'm looking forward to this changing the way we work with data. I'm looking forward to a new paradigm of how we should work with data. And I would say it is probably the biggest innovation since ever, to be honest, but at least since Power BI. Yeah. So I'm Mathias Halkjær. I'm a principal architect of a pan-European company called Fellowmind. We're working with everything Microsoft, and among that, we have data analytics in Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany, and Netherlands, at least, and we may have more. We generally focus on close collaboration with our clients, and we just enjoy seeing them thrive and implement kick-ass data platforms. I'm also, as said earlier, I'm a Microsoft MVP within the data platform. I am a parent, foodie, casual gamer, just tech nerd all the way around. And I'm usually speaking about my favorite tools, Power BI, Azure Synapse, and SQL. And today, also my new absolute best friend and favorite tool, Microsoft Fabric. Besides that, I also host my personal blog, fluxbi.com, where I have blogs, there's quizzes, there's t-shirts, and everything you should be able to find from there. And apart from that, I'm hosting a Power BI quiz and a data platform quiz, usually monthly. And both of them are casual, low-key, just nice and comfy quizzes in the evening. No pressure, it's a bit of fun. There is a price and it's noticeable, but that's not what you should attend for. You should attend for the nice and very, very, very cool engagement in the comments, because people from all around the world just chat away at topics. And I don't think I've seen any other format generate so much commenting and chatting and banter and just people enjoying themselves. So definitely recommend it. But of course, I'm also biased. Anyway, the next quiz will be next week. We'll have Nelly Gustafsson there from Microsoft. I look very much forward to that, and I hope to see all of you. But we're not here to talk about my quizzes or me. We're here to talk about Fabric, because I hope all of you are very excited about Fabric and the announcement from last week. And I'm, of course, as well. I'm very much looking forward to get a chance to introduce people to this very, very cool new, not tool, but platform. So for anyone who may even not have covered a single news about Fabric yet, if there are such people, I don't know, Fabric will be a compilation of a lot of toolboxes. It's not even a bunch of tools. We're actually getting a bunch of toolboxes with each of their own individual tools. So we get all these new experiences ranging from data factory, data engineering, data warehouse, data science, real-time analytics, and a new OneLake to kind of put them all together. And then we got a little gist of something coming soon, which will be the data activator, which is only in private preview right now. So don't have much about that. And finally, some changes to Power BI and Power BI being included in this whole holistic platform. So the platform is divided into different experiences. And the different experiences, I just mentioned them before, will each of them will have their own set of tools, their own set of technologies, and their own set of, well, their own toolboxes. So from one day to the other, we went from having one toolbox in the Power BI service to now having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 toolboxes in the Microsoft Fabric service. Whereas one of these toolboxes are now the Power BI that we all already know and love and have enjoyed. And very soon we'll have 7 toolboxes. And all of these toolboxes are kind of glued together with OneLake at the core, making sure that everything we do within the individual experiences, within the individual toolboxes, are all neatly tied together with a common data storage platform and a common data format. And this is, of course, very conceptual. So how does it, at a glance, look like in real life? Well, very much similar, actually. So in the future, when we log into Microsoft Fabric, what we're seeing is one unified platform where we have all of these individual experiences and toolbox that we can just dig into and use from the get-go. This will, of course, change the way we do data. This will, of course, change the way we think about a data platform. And it also definitely will mash up things in regards to what our individual roles will be. If I'm currently a Power BI person, do I need to learn these new tools? Are these new tools for other people in the organizations? Are there some of them I could learn? These are the questions that we're probably going to have to ask ourselves in the year or two, or maybe even less going forward. But I think it is questions that we are going to have to ask ourselves at some point. That being said, what will actually happen to the Power BI we already know and we already love? So if you ask me, I would say nothing. Nothing in the sense that, well, yeah, the icons may be changing. They're wrapped up in a new neat package. We have a new platform that they're part of. But the actual tools, the data flow, the data set, and the reports and all the other objects, well, they will remain the same as we know them and as we've built them. And all we learned about how to build them, best practices, well, they will in some sense remain the same. So I think one important thing to mention is that if you're worried in any way that you just built a big project or a big nice feature, an awesome data model across your whole company, actually unifying a single source of truth or something like that, don't be worried about that suddenly being having to be rebuilt. Everything you have today will still work going forward. Everything you learn today will still be applicable in the future in some way. So what will actually then happen? Well, nothing happens initially, but we also do need to consider that the toolbox of Power BI suddenly just got expanded overnight. So even though they're part of other experiences, we actually get some tools that can do some of the tasks that we already did in Power BI, and maybe for some of them, they can do them better. These are the things we need to investigate going forward. But one of the big things, if you ask me, is that we've had for a long time a gap in being able to do proper end-to-end analytics in Power BI. We could do transformation of data, light transformations. We could also load it into our data models, and we could do something with data flows and stuff like that. But we never actually were able to build robust and nice data warehouses or robust and nice data lake houses-ish concept in the Power BI, as it were. We always stumbled into limitations, hacks we need to do to get around certain things and stuff like that. So things like historical data handling, things like snapshots and saving data and sharing data outside of Power BI, these were challenges before. But they could also be that the challenges that were from a Power BI point of view never really noticed, because there are challenges existing in the outer circles of our own work. So it could be challenges our colleagues had, or it could be problems that just didn't have a solution today in an organization. Well, now we can actually do a proper backend data platform, not in Power BI. So the dream of an end-to-end data platform in Power BI is, well, it's going to be the dream of an end-to-end data platform in Microsoft Fabric instead. And I really enjoy that vision of having separate experiences that can kind of work together to achieve this goal. And as I said before, everything we already know and love from Power BI will continue as usual. We just got new tools in our toolbox, and we need to consider that, but we don't need to panic about it or stress about it. These are just added benefits. Yeah. So we had all these tools, or we had all these toolboxes, from Factory to Power BI to Data Actuator, coming later. And in the middle of them, we have one lake. And if you ask me, what are the game changers in Fabric? Well, if we look at the different experiences individually, I'm just seeing, in some respects, upgraded tools, in some respects, new limitations, but I'm seeing very similar tools to what we already had in Azure Synapse Analytics, in Azure Data Factory, in Azure Event Hub, Azure Streaming Analytics, and so on and so on. So if we look at what are the revolutionary things, what are the game changes, what makes this a new paradigm in BI? I think one of the core elements of that is the one lake. Because the one lake gives us one central repository for data that everyone in the organization can use to share and collaborate around the data. So being able to, no matter who you are in an organization, to have a common data format, a common data storage, and just a common way to share your data with your colleagues, I think that is the game changers that will make all the individual tools and toolboxes of Microsoft Fabric elevate each other and just make the whole thing work better, make the individual parts work better, make the whole will work better than the individual parts would have done by themselves. Furthermore, One Lake brings us this idea of being able to collaborate across no matter who we are at the organization. So suddenly the data warehouse developers can speak the same language as the data analyst, the data scientist, the data engineer, and the data administrator. They will have a central data repository. They will have a central way of managing their data. It will be one lake in all that entails. So what does this mean if you take a step back and talk about architecture? Because if you read some of the marketing material around if you read some of the marketing material around Microsoft Fabric, you will see terms like one architecture. It's a promise of not having to think about architecture anymore. And I'm not completely convinced about that, but there are some good arguments there, because if we go back in time and we talk about how things used to look, well, we could very easily have, let me just grab that. Very easily we could have stuff like having to manage our network infrastructure. We could have stuff like having to manage our overall Azure landing zones and stuff like that. And all of that needed to be set up for us to even get started with something like Synapse Analytics or Azure Data Factory, or etc. With Microsoft Fabric, these tools are now baked into our software as a solution center that we already knew and loved from Power BI, but it's just being expanded with all these new tools, still in a software as a service manner. So you don't have to spin up specific cloud resources and be worried about making sure you have the actual way of handling those. You just start on Fabric and the tools already there, and you can just start creating. The architectural part, the cloud architectural part just got way simpler. But we still have to think about how we use the individual tools. Still need to think about, do we use the new lakehouse? Do we use the new warehouse? Do we use data pipelines? And for what cases do we use data pipelines? And when do we use data flows? And there are still plenty of questions that needs to be thought about in this new seconds, because we just had so many new tools. But it becomes more of a solution architectural thing and thinking about those than it is classical infrastructural cloud architectural decisions. Then there's something about capacity and pricing. So at the time I prepared this slide, we didn't yet have the pricings for the new Fabric capacities. We only had the new SKUs. So what I can tell you is that it seems to be divided into two SKUs. So we'll have, or SKUs. We will have Azure, which is built per second with no commitment. So we can spin them up, we can change the capacity size, and we can also turn them off if we need to at times. So those are more flexible if you want to do stuff like processing a lot of data overnight, or something in that respect. And then finally, we have Microsoft 365, which are built monthly or yearly with monthly commitments. And And then we're probably going to see something in the future with, the standard Microsoft way of doing some of these pricing. So what we do know, and we do know this because Microsoft held a Reddit AMA and Ask Me Anything 2 days ago, and we got some sneak peek into some things that were not yet revealed from that Reddit AMA, which is kind of a cool thing. And one of them is that we got the news that the lowest capacity unit, the lowest SKU, so the F2, would be priced around something like $160 to $180 per month. So if you ask me, this is in itself such a big new groundbreaking news, because not only does this mean that, I would argue, anyone in the world, probably not, but anyone realistically, any normal organization should be able to afford this with all the power they have. So anyone can get Fabric for this price. Anyone can also get Power BI Premium for this price, which I think is unbelievable. So I look forward to diving in more into that and to get more official numbers for these things. But it looks very, very promising, if you ask me. And if you're curious what that means in respect to the others, if we assume it's the same price per capacity unit, and this is a big assumption, we actually are landing on prices that seem very, very similar to the equivalent Power BI SKUs. So it's, but again, the only thing I've seen officially is that one number, the lowest capacity, $160 to $180. I'm very excited about that pricing, and I look so much forward to see what more will be announced in the time going forward. So one of the things I would say, with all these new tools in our Power BI toolbox, there are some things I would consider. So we have warehouses, we have lakehouses, we have data marts, pipeline, notebooks. We have so many new tools. And I know probably half of you here are sitting, watching, thinking, wait, that's a lot of things I didn't hear about yet, or maybe didn't look into yet. Well, Fabric is just coming with so many features. I think it is the biggest thing happening in the space of and around Power BI since Power BI itself was launched. So there's a lot of things going on with Microsoft Fabric. So as an organization, I think it's time to start looking into how do we organize this? How do we govern this? If we don't already have very strict governance or very tight governance in our organizations, I think this is the time to start looking in that direction. Because today, if we don't think so much about how we organize things, we may end up with data models here and there and duplicate data and duplicate data sets and things just being, well, not having a single source of truth. But in the future, and I want to say, I usually call these spaghetti data models. So these data models where everything points to each other, all going bi-directional and nothing really makes sense in them. Well, that can be a result of poor governance and poor management around your artifacts in Power BI. But that's kind of at times a bit of a low risk thing. It doesn't matter that much because sometimes in a report that may not be very impactful anyway, or very important or very critical. But now we're moving our backend into the same platform. It's not called Power BI, but it's called Microsoft Fabric. And this means if we don't step up our governance, we may look into the same patterns, but with our backend. So suddenly loading in data to some data warehouse, which is then being used for some machine learning that were probably never actually tested if it worked all right. Then saved back into the same warehouse. Then that data is loaded into a lakehouse, finally going through some data flows, and nobody has an idea what's going on with this data or how trustworthy it is. And then maybe it may even be loaded back into the first data warehouse it came from. And then finally some reporting trying to get an idea of all that data. So I think this is the risk of having all these awesome capabilities in the platform, is that we're kind of opening up Pandora's box here. We're getting so many cool new tools, but that also means we're getting so many cool new tools in the hand of our business users. So just think about that going forward. In the platform, you will see a bunch of experiences. So there's the data factory experience. There's the Synapse data engineering experience. There's the Synapse data warehouse experience, the Synapse data science experience, the Synapse real-time analytics experience, the Power BI experience that we already know, the data accelerator experience coming soon, and then the one leg tying them all together. And if we dig down to some of these individual experiences, you will see that they're all filled with somewhat new tools. So if we start with the data factory, the data factory is giving us two new tools to consider. The first is a data flow Gen 2. The second is a data pipeline. And to make it short and simple, the new data flows Gen 2 will be a redesigned version of the one that we already know and already are familiar with. It has a very similar UI, and I haven't done a thorough testing if there's any limitations, but it seems like it is everything you could do in data flows, you could kind of also do in Gen 2, but don't take my word for that. Do your own testing and validation on that part. The big difference here is that the new data flows, Gen 2, is built on the Spark engine, meaning it works much better with larger data sets. We should, and this is an assumption here, so working better with larger data sets, I'm assuming that this also means that the times where if we're loading in too much data or loading in too many objects, that data flows suddenly become very slow, or that it takes 2 hours to save the changes to a data flows, that these times will be in the past. This is my hope, and this is what I think we also get. But another powerful thing in the new data flow is that we're getting the data destinations feature. So in data flows Gen 2, we will be able to, for each table, to actually choose a storage location where we want to save that data after it's being loaded in. So we can suddenly use data flows not just to build data sets on top, but we can actually use it to move data from A to B and transform it along the way. Which also obviously means that data flows in the future can be used for very simple and low-scale data platforms, data warehouse kind of things, where you do some transformations in data flow and save the data back into your storage, into your lakehouse or into your warehouse. It just opens up the possibilities of what data flow could be used for. And then we have, hold on. Sorry about that. There you go. And then we have the pipelines with a nice picture of a colleague of mine. So the pipelines will, for those of you who don't know already, Azure Data Factory, it's the pipelines we already know from Azure Data Factory, along with from Synapse Analytics. And these are pipelines especially effective if you want to move, not necessarily large amount of data, but more broad amount of data. So if you have, for example, 100 databases, or if you have even 200 tables, then you can easily set up some metadata logic in pipelines and load all those 400 tables, not at the same time, but in one big pipeline. You don't have to make a transformation, an object, or a load for each of them individually. So it's a very flexible way of loading big amounts of data from a lot of tables. Also, it has some advanced capabilities around handling APIs and pagination in APIs, and really, for some APIs, they're just enjoyable REST APIs. So for advanced data ingestion, data pipelines are not for transformation, so they are for data ingestion only. Technically, you could do some light transformations on them, but I don't necessarily advise or encourage that. I see a question on the chat. If the company already uses Dataflow, is it Dataflow? DF? Yeah. Synapse Power BI, what will be the impact of Microsoft Fabric then? So let's step it back for a bit and say we are already using some of these tools. It doesn't have to be specific object from Synapse. Let's say we're already using some engineering, some data factory, or something else. What happens to these in the new world where we have Fabric? First of all, the current tools are not going away. Does not put a deadline on when these, if ever, will be phased out. They are still the robust and mature cloud offering. So very much similar to how analysis service is still running and is still very applicable in some cases, we will see the same thing with Synapse. Of course, there could be a time if we move ahead 5, 6, maybe more years from now, where the tools inside the Fabric solution has matured so much that they are just better than the cloud equivalent in every way, and that they have even added more tools on top of them, just like we saw with Power BI datasets over analysis service. That could happen, but I don't think you should be afraid of that happening in a year or two. I think we're looking at and I'm just speculating. I think we're looking at similar time.
Sorry, Mathias. Just wanted to interrupt you. I think you're breaking while speaking. So is your internet connection okay? Just wanted to make sure.
Oh, great. Thanks. Let me check.
It's actually better now. It was breaking a few minutes back.
The joy of the presentation gods.
Yeah.
So let's track it and see how we go, Mathias. But as you broke for a question, I think this is a great time to jump in with a couple more, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Pragati, my audio is very low today, so if you wouldn't mind taking
I'll take them.
That'll be great.
Yeah, I'll take them. Don't worry. So in the starting, Mathias, when you were talking about what all things Fabric has got, I think Donald Parrish mentioned, I think mapping data flows is deadish now. So do you think, or do you have any comments on that side?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
So it's not the question, it's just a comment about from Donald, like he thinks like mapping data flows is deadish now in Fabric.
To my knowledge, mapping data flows is not part of Fabric. So we have it's kind of competing with data flows. We have two no-code ways of doing data transformation, and what will happen between those two, I don't think I have a clear answer right now. I don't completely remember what is being announced and what is not around that.
That's fine.
So if you two guys listening here has a more clear memory about that, you may chime in, but otherwise let's just move on.
Yeah, I'll just take one more question. So Mary, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So the question is, what's the difference between OneLake and OneDrive?
That's a good question. So OneDrive is for collaboration around files. So that would be Word documents, Excel files, stuff like that. Things that are file-based for usage in some sort of software, Word, Excel, etc. It could be video files, it could be images, stuff like that. OneLake is a similar way of working with files, except that these files have a whole different purpose. So the files in your OneLake would be files of data in some way or another. You may see duplicate in the sense that you may see even a picture going to OneLake, which is also can go to OneDrive. But the use case for having them in the two different locations is very different. If it's in OneDrive, you're probably wanting to use this picture to share to colleagues for using, maybe to upload to a web application, or just share with your colleagues for giggles. But if you place it in OneLake, you probably have it there because you want to analyze something in that picture, maybe across other pictures or something advanced like that. But that's even a fringe case. The normal thing you would see in OneLake would be data files. So you would see CSV files, you would see Parquet files, and you would especially see the Delta Lake Parquet format that is the bread and butter of the new OneLake. So OneLake is not just a unified storage place, it's also a unified storage format on the Delta Lake Parquet. So one format that all of these tools that you see here at the top, they all can read that same format, and most of them can also write to that format in some capacity. There are limitations today. We have a bit of, if one tool created the file, the other one may not be able to change it. they have to then write a new file. But if we look apart from those details, they can all now read and write one single format, which means we don't have to think about how to move the work of a data scientist over to a data analyst. The data scientist just saves the data to OneLake, and then the data analyst can use that right away. Which actually brings me into, I don't know, do we have more questions?
We have got few questions. I mean, are you okay to take them now, or should we take?
Let's because I want to say, when we're at that topic, because now everything is centralized around OneLake, and I'm sure we have people here on the channel going like, but from a Power BI perspective, what's really the new deal here? Because we just have to load this OneLake data now into our data sets. I mean, that's pretty much no change at all. But
maybe we can. You can continue, and then we can take questions after a few minutes.
I want to say that we're also getting a really very new cool feature in Power BI called Direct Lake. And Direct Lake is, and now I'm just paraphrasing what Microsoft is communicating around this. I did not yet benchmark it. I still feel that what they're saying seems still a bit too good to be true. So I do need to preface this with a bit of caution here. But what they're saying is that the new Direct Lake format will be, so you all know Direct Query. If we use Direct Query, we get real-time data, but it's kind of slow. We have to wait a few seconds to see our data, maybe even longer. But we get it in real time. And then we have import, where we load in the data, we do some periodic refresh, but the load time can be pretty long, depending on the size of the data. And the refresh time is, of course, also a limitation. You never get actual data that's only a few seconds old. You get data from some sort of time ago, either every hour or every day, or sometimes even less. The thing about Direct Lake is that since import was always in some sense using some data lake, something, you know how we created a data flow before, we could actually store the data in a data lake. So in some way, the backend of import was already data lake in some format. The thing about Direct Lake is that now it utilizes that the data are stored in that data lake, or in the OneLake, sorry, and it's stored in a Delta file that the engine can just hit directly and use for the report. So when we open a report and it needs to show us some data, it can just go and get the files from the lake and show them to us directly, meaning that we will get the timeliness of Direct Query, the responsiveness, the real-timeness of Direct Query, but the performance of import mode. So the promise here is, and I just want to repeat it because I almost still cannot believe it myself, the promise here is that we get something akin to Direct Query, which will load as fast as we know from import mode. So that is pretty cool. And I just can't wait to get my hands on it and test if this is actually the case. Because if it is, then that is in itself will be a revolution. So I mean, there's features enough to keep talking for way longer than we have scheduled today. So I want to try to hone in on these essentials and also answer questions. So I could do a very quick demo and maybe try to answer questions while doing it. We could be a good way to do both. But otherwise, I want to show you guys how the new interface looks, how it feels, and how we can actually do end-to-end pipelines in what we used to call the Power BI service, which is now the Fabric service. But yeah, just keep the questions coming. Great questions so far.
Yeah, so what I'll do, Mathias, is I'll just say a few questions, and then if you want to try answering them with the demo, it's fine. Otherwise, we can divert those questions afterwards to you.
Absolutely.
So one question that Jason asked earlier was like, he's trying to understand if this is all only for premium Power BI users. I think one of the audience answered it, but yeah, if you would like to take that.
So yes, it is. You need a premium capacity, and Microsoft did communicate in the same Reddit AMA that there's no plans. It seems there are no plans for a user-based model around this. You will need a capacity for the Fabric features. But the big change is that you can get started for these 160 to 180 US per month. So having a capacity is much less of a blocker than it used to be. And on top of that, if I didn't make it clear earlier, this also means that you can get premium features for the same price point, because you get the whole package. It's not just the fabric, you get the whole package for the smallest capacity, 160 to 180 US dollars per month.
Thank you.
That's pretty cool. So this is the new interface. So we already know the Power BI, but now there are just a few more symbols for us to click on. And each of these is a unique experience where we have the individual toolbox. So if I go to Power BI, I have the same interface I always used and enjoyed. And I can go to my workspace and I can create a report, scorecard, dataset, data flow, all we already knew. And then some new things as well. The big difference is I have this little button down here in the bottom, where if I click that one, I can suddenly choose between the different experiences. So I could go to the Data Factory experience and suddenly have new shortcuts for creating Data Factory objects, the pipeline, the data flow. I can go to the workspace and you will see the drop down is now different. It still shows items from across the different experiences, but the one I'm actually focusing on are prioritized in the top.
Sorry, Mathias, can you zoom out your screen a little bit? I'm not sure if everyone, I think that's much better. Thank you.
Yes. So we can change between these experiences, which also means that we can kind of compartmentalize. Anyway, we can put things into a bit of boxes, and people can say, well, I'm a data engineer, so I'm working with the data engineering tools, and then I'm staying within that experience. But I could also branch out and say, well, in my workspace, I just want to show all the tools, and I can click the show all button, and I'll then get all the tools from across the different experiences. So it's not necessarily limited as it is now. Now, let's try to do an end-to-end pipeline and see if we can do that. So I have a target of doing this in 10 minutes. It's very overly ambitious. I think I've succeeded with it in 15 minutes so far. So let's see if it's possible. And I'll try to talk while I do it. And you can still try to jump in with questions that are relevant along the way. So I'm starting with creating a pipeline for loading in the data. And the pipeline will be a new experience to people who are not familiar with Azure Data Factory or Synapse Pipeline. And the pipeline is a way to load in a big amount of data. So here I am adding a pipeline activity. And that pipeline activity I want here is a copy data activity. I want to copy some data. And I simply have to decide here on a source. And in this case, I maybe already have a connection, or I can create a new connection. And this connection has connectors that we already are familiar with. So in this case, I can, for example, go with an Azure SQL database. I can type in my credentials, my database, AdventureWorks, and so on and so forth. And I will be asked here, if I didn't already, I will be asked to add like login credentials. Now, after setting up this connection, I can then choose it in my list of connections I have available here. And then I have my source here. I also need to choose a connection type, in this case, an Azure SQL database, and I can start choosing a table. So I just pick a random table here and say, I'm loading this job candidate data now. So that is the load part of it. I also need to add a destination. A destination in a Fabric way of thinking would ideally be a lakehouse or a data warehouse. I could also have chosen an external database and saved it back to a SQL server or saved it back to a data lake or something like that. But I want to keep things in Fabric here to make things easy and simple. So I choose lakehouse type, and then I can just click and create a new lakehouse, and I can give it a name, for example, lakehouse, click create, and the lakehouse will be spun up. Now I've cheated a bit and done this beforehand, because the lakehouse has kind of a quirk where it needs to be up for around 10 minutes before all the functionality is available.
One question, Mathias, as you are getting the data there. So there's a question from Ileana. Is there any limitation in terms of data volume retrieval similar to the import limitation?
I don't have an answer for that question. Probably somewhere it's in the documentation. I don't know it by memory. I don't think I've stumbled upon such limitation in pipelines in Data Factory, in Azure Data Factory, but I would check the documentation to see if it says anything there.
Thank you.
I'm
And then there's
doing at least millions, if not billions, rows in pipeline. So I would assume the same here, but I haven't tested it specifically. Anyway, I set up the copy data. So now I copied one table, but I really want to make that more dynamic because I don't want to set up one of these for every single table in my database. So what I can do is I can set some sort of metadata repository up, which is just a fancy way of saying data that we can manually edit. And in this case, I actually stored this in the same database. So in my source database, I stored something that I called my ingestion config table. So here I have my ingestion config table, and it's kind of a simple table. You are allowed to see it here. It has some source schema from metadata about what are the tables I want to load out of the system, and path of where I want to save them. And that's it. I can then use this metadata in my copy activity, but I can also add a for each, so it rolls through each individual rows of my lookup and does this action iteratively. So instead of copying something once, I can now go to the for each, and I can put my copy data in there. I'm just copy pasting it here. Now the copy data is inside the for each. It will repeat itself for each row in my lookup. And I need to define here on the for each what it actually needs to get. It's copying the output of the output of the lookup. And it's the value of that output. So I just defined what it is supposed to iterate through, what it's going to repeat over, and it's going to repeat over each individual rows of values in my lookup. Now I can add these table specifications, not hard-coded, but dynamically with variables. So I can choose from the item here and say, I want to take the source schema. And I want to take the source table value. And I'm adding these as variables instead of hard-coded value. And I do the same for the destination. I don't want them all to be called table name. I want them to have dynamic names, and I want them to be called destination file. That is the name, exactly. A bit of intelligence even helped me there. So now I have a list of data, and I told this to run through that list and just do the same thing for each step along the way. And that same thing is copying my data and put it in my lakehouse. So I can run it and see that everything runs as it should. And I need to save it along the way, and that is all fine. And in a moment, you should be able to see it should start running and creating these objects. So it's starting the for each, and within that for each, it spins. Oh, it failed. That happens. Sorry, there's nothing to do about this. I've run the same exact pipeline multiple times the last few days. It's just still a public preview. There are still quirks. But I can show you here in another instance how it should have looked. Close this, open this, and so same exact pipeline here. Yes, ingest in config, and I can run it. So it's running, and it's pulling in data, and everything should be good. And you see it spun up 3 copy data activities because that was what was defined in my tables. I had 3 rows of data, and it just did that. This means if I want to load not just 3 tables, but I want to load maybe 100 or something like that, I can actually go and just have a list with even more tables, like something like this, which actually has 50 different tables. And it can run in the same simple pipeline, but now it will copy all 50 tables. So very dynamic and very kind of flexible way of loading in large amounts of data from different tables. And you see, it's done. It loaded in the data, and we should be good to move on to the next step. So we just picked 3 tables because this is a demo. Can I actually just do something quick here and say destination should be Now it needs to be the same workspace. That makes sense. So we're continuing on this one. So now we have data loaded into our lakehouse, and that's pretty neat because now we have the. Let me delete this for a bit. No. So we have the customer, sales order detail, and sales order header. Now that's part of the lakehouse, and maybe we want to do some transformations. So we can go and create a data flow Gen 2. It's here. And go and do some, just for a test, some simple steps here. So in this case, just merge these two sales order details, sales order header into one fact sales order. Then we added a surrogate key to the dim customer, and then we merged in that surrogate key into the fact sales orders, just to do some simple dimension modeling. The neat thing is that we can utilize the new diagram view to actually get an overview of what's happening here. I kind of enjoy that new feature. It's pretty nice. So I can see here the dim customer goes through some navigation steps. It adds an index, that's the surrogate key. It renames it, and then it reorders the column. Pretty simple. And then the sales order tables, they don't do anything except they're merged together into the new fact order table. And then the new surrogate keys are merged into that table as well, which gives us two neat actually fact and dim tables. So the new thing is here, I can go to my table and choose a destination. So I can click down here, click a destination, and I can choose, should I save it to a, yeah, that's fine. Do I save it to a lakehouse? Do I save it to a SQL database? Or I could even save it to an Azure Synapse Analytics data warehouse or a Data Explorer cluster in Azure. So I can actually save my data somewhere else than in the data flow itself. So that means I can use data flows both to ingest and load the data into our data platform, but also as a transformation engine that can save that data back to our platform. Pretty neat and pretty cool. So let's say we did that. It would have to save the data flow, and I would have to run it once to actually copy the data. And then we would have in our data lakehouse, in our lakehouse, we would have these new dim and fact tables. Now that's a pretty good step of the way. We loaded in some data, we transformed that data, we did a bit of dimensional modeling on it. I know it's very low key, but we did some. Maybe now I want to create a Power BI data set. Now, if I just wanted the standard data set, I didn't really have to do much because it is already there in the lakehouse. I actually can just go back to my workspace, and it has here the default data set. So I have a default data set that's already created with all the tables of my lakehouse. And I can and I can point and click these. But I could also say, well, no, I don't want the default. I want to create my own. And I can do that from within the lakehouse here. I can create a new Power BI data set. It's a little bit of a UI bug here. Again, preview. Confirm, load in these new tables. And shouldn't take a lot of time. And there you have two new tables. I can add, this was found automatically, but if it wasn't, I could have done it manually. Customer surrogate key to customer surrogate key, creating the dependency between them. And that's it. I have my data model. So I saved the data model here, and all should be good. Not this way. And we're finally done.
I think we have one question just related to what you just showed.
Yes.
So Ian just asked, how was that default data set created? I think the default staging lakehouse, I think.
Good question. Very good question. For that, I would like to actually go back to this. I want to say the lakehouse, actually, when we create it, it's automatically created as it creates 3 artifacts. So no matter what we do, the moment we click create a new lakehouse, it creates the lakehouse itself. it creates a SQL endpoint for that lakehouse, and it creates the default data set on top of it. And any changes we make in the lakehouse will be automatically reflected in both these two kind of add-on artifacts. So that means that if we add data to our lakehouse, we can immediately query it through SQL and use it elsewhere, either externally or elsewhere within Fabric. Or we can utilize it in the dataset also in a similar manner. So that's how it was created, automatically, and not even with it's just part of the lakehouse. It's not kind of a separate component. It is part of it, the same way that the default dataset is part of Datamart today. But I created my own manual new dataset here, which is fine. So I can have a bit more control of what is part of it and make my own relations and make sure. I could also change the relations in the lakehouse, but I can create a old-fashioned dataset on top of it. Now the cool thing is, if we check the data model here, and we see here, if you look at the storage mode, it is actually utilizing this new direct lake already today. So when I'm excited, and I hope someone will benchmark this, and I hope I have the time to benchmark this soon, it's because we actually already have access to this new storage mode. So we can start checking it, using it, seeing how well it performs. We can make direct lake data models, but we can only make them in the service so far. We can only make them by creating a data set on top of the lakehouse here in the Fabric service. But once I have that data set, I can now create a new report on it. And of course, we utilize some of the easy given tools here in the platform. So I can just have it auto-generate a report for me based on the data. I could offer it to help pre-select that these are important data, these are important data. I actually don't want the modified date to be used. I want instead the order quantity, that's important, and the product ID, something like that. And it auto updates the report. Of course, it's not a perfect report. It will never be, but we have a starting point, and I can start editing this and actually create the report I want based from this. So I got a starting point. And what I just think we achieved now here is still in 15 minutes. We went from a data source. We did some robust pipeline ingestion of, in this case, 3 tables, but it could as well have been 100 tables. We did light transformations in the lakehouse with data flows. And then finally, a data set up top of the lakehouse and a report on top of that. And all of that within 15 minutes. To me, this is the power of Microsoft Fabric. Of course, in real life, it will not take 15 minutes. But having that in a unified workspace where different people can do each part of the step of the process and just have a single platform where when I load in the data, it's just ready for you. We don't need to talk about where I need to save them for you to then load them into a different system and having copies of our data all around. It is in one place. So I hope you enjoyed the demo and the session today, and we have maybe time for 1 or 2 quick questions. And
definitely, Mathias. I think this was amazing. First of all,
thank you.
So I think
it's so easy to present a product like this.
Definitely.
Show it as it is.
Yeah, I think I would just chime into few quick questions. So, like for example, can you edit this report in the desktop?
Can direct support in the desktop? Not now. That's all I know.
Oh, sorry, it's about the report. You can edit this report in Power BI desktop.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Not the dataset either. I'm pretty sure that if I went and tried to download the dataset, I wouldn't be able to. We can.
Can't you connect directly to the dataset from Power BI desktop?
Oh yeah.
Download. Yeah, right. You can actually download the PBIX, and then I think
you cannot download it. You could see. This is what I don't know. Maybe you could create a report from desktop using it as a source, but I'm pretty sure you couldn't modify the data model.
Okay.
And then we have the create operational report, which I have no idea what is.
Yeah, I think I've seen it just now. Okay, I think this is something we can explore maybe. And then the other question, what Nebusa is asking, will we be able to use Power BI desktop and publish as normal? Will the data model be added to OneLake by default?
Will we be able to use desktop as normal? Yes, but but maybe. So yes, we will be able to use it as normal even today, but we are creating the classic data sets with import mode or with direct query. If we want to utilize the direct lake right now, it needs to be done in the service. So I'm not certain about if there's a roadmap for putting direct lake in desktop or not, but yeah, that's something I will be on the lookout for if it appears on some sort of roadmap.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
No, thank you very much, Mathias. I think that we're at time, which is very much a shame today.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what an absolutely amazing session. Apologies for not being vocal enough. There's really bad audio for me here today, but I wanted to say a fantastic introductory session to the power of Fabric, what can be achieved, and obviously what's still left to be explored as well, Mathias. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And everyone out there listening, I'm active on LinkedIn, so just tune in. Oh, you cannot use this one. No, probably you won't be able to. The picture is in the way. Search for my name.
We have shared your link. We have shared your LinkedIn social, so everyone can connect with you directly.
And, reach out, message me if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to try to give you the best answer I can. Or otherwise, I can try to forward the question to Microsoft here if they have a better answer than me. But don't be a stranger. I'm open for continuing this talk offline. I think is the term. Let's take it offline. Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
It's amazing, Mathias, and I've just actually, even though we've met many times face to face, I've just found out you're a casual gamer. So now we have to discuss that in more detail the next time we meet face to face.
And I need to have time to actually do some gaming.
Agreed. But no, like I say, Mathias, thank you very much for joining us. We will have you back very soon, and we can deep dive into some more of these topics as well.
Awesome.
Excellent. With that being said, Pragati, thank you very much for being here as well for today's session. This has been, we've made it work. So apologies to everybody in terms of if there are any audio difficulties. We've had to make this work across the globe with a lot going on, but we wanted to ensure that we were here with you to deliver this session for you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today, and hope you enjoyed the first ever Fabric session on our user group. And we are hoping to bring some new content to you soon next month. So yeah, stay tuned.
Definitely. Thank you, everybody. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you've been here with us at the Microsoft Fabric UK user group. Stay safe and see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.